Before we dive into the electrifying moment that reset the rules of engagement on national television, take a second to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the bell so you never miss another story that pushes back, breaks through, and speaks truth without apology. Because what you're about to read isn't just a story, it's a front-row seat to a reckoning. The midday sun, a relentless golden hammer, blazed over Manhattan, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete canyons. But inside ABC's bustling headquarters, the heat was of a different kind, generated by the flickering studio lights of The View as they hummed to life. The air in the control room was thick enough to cut with a knife, buzzing with an almost palpable anticipation. Producers, usually a whirlwind of controlled chaos, moved with a heightened, almost reverent energy. Today wasn't just another Tuesday. Today's guest wasn't another predictable liberal darling, another voice echoing the comfortable consensus. No, today, the stage was set for Karoline Leavitt. She was the bold, the unapologetic, the fiercely conservative White House press secretary under President Trump, a name that, even whispered, could ignite a firestorm in these hallowed halls. Her presence alone was a challenge, a deliberate disruption to the carefully curated echo chamber. Her appearance had been teased all week across every media platform, framed with the deceptive innocence as a conversation. But anyone with even a fleeting understanding of the show's gladiatorial arena knew the truth. This was going to be a showdown, a clash of ideologies, a battle for the narrative, broadcast live to millions. Backstage, in the quiet hum before the storm, Joy Behar adjusted her signature red-framed glasses, pushing them higher on her nose with a gesture that betrayed a simmering irritation. Her eyes, narrowed to slits, scanned her notes one last time, as if searching for a fatal flaw, a vulnerability. "She's just another MAGA puppet," she muttered, the words a low growl barely audible above the distant studio chatter. A cold, determined smile played on her lips. "Let's see if she survives 5 minutes in front of me." It wasn't a question. It was a promise, laced with the confidence of a seasoned predator. The stage manager's voice cut through the tension, a crisp countdown. 3, 2, we're live. The familiar upbeat intro music swelled, then faded, leaving a pregnant silence that was instantly filled by Whoopi Goldberg's quick, almost perfunctory introduction. But before the applause could fully register, before the polite pleasantries could even begin, Joy Behar cut in. Her voice, usually a blunt instrument, was honed to a razor's edge, dripping with her usual unfiltered bluntness. "We've got Karoline Leavitt with us today," she announced, the words laced with a barely concealed disdain. "She works for Donald Trump, and frankly, I don't know how she sleeps at night." A ripple of laughter, well-practiced and immediate, swept through the audience. It was the expected reaction, the comfortable validation. But Karoline Leavitt didn't flinch. She simply smiled, a poised, deliberate curve of her lips. Her signature navy blazer was perfectly pressed, her silver cross necklace catching the studio lights, a tiny, defiant glint. "Thanks for the warm welcome, Joy," she said, her tone a deceptive sugariness that belied the razor-sharp edge beneath. Her gaze held Behar's, unwavering. "And don't worry, I sleep just fine, especially knowing I fight for truth while you peddle narrative." The room shifted, a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor. The canned laughter died, replaced by a quiet, expectant tension. The game, it seemed, had just begun. Joy blinked. The saccharine sweetness of Karoline's voice, combined with the unexpected verbal jab, had momentarily thrown the veteran host off balance. It was a rare sight, and the studio audience, sensing the shift, leaned forward, their collective breath held. Joy quickly recalibrated, her lips pursing tighter, her eyes narrowing. "You come in here talking about truth," she scoffed, her voice regaining its usual bite, "but your administration is built on lies, election denial, fake patriotism, culture wars." The familiar accusations, the well-worn talking points flowed effortlessly. This was her turf, her script. But Karoline Leavitt, with a calm that bordered on unnerving, simply raised her hand. It wasn't a plea for silence, but a gesture of command. Enough with the lies, Joy, she said, her voice firm, cutting through the air like a honed blade. The pleasantries were over. The gloves were off. You and your colleagues attack Middle America daily. You call people racist for loving their country. You mock religion. You mock families. And you hide behind progress while silencing anyone who dares to disagree. The words landed with the force of a physical blow, stripping away the veneer of polite disagreement. Joy scoffed again, a dismissive sound, trying to reassert control. "Are you done?" she snapped, a challenge in her tone. Karoline leaned in, her eyes locking onto Joy's, a steely resolve hardening her gaze. "Not until I say what millions of Americans think, but you won't let them say. You sit in this studio protected by applause and camera angles, pretending you speak for the people. But here's the truth. You don't speak for us. You've become the voice of the elite, disconnected from real Americans." The audience stirred, a ripple of conflicting emotions washing over the studio. Some clapped, a bold, defiant sound in the usually homogeneous crowd. Others gasped, shocked by the directness, the raw challenge to the show's established authority. Karoline continued, her voice calm, almost conversational, yet each word was a blistering indictment. "I came here today not to make friends, but to say directly what you won't hear in your bubble. Your era is ending. The days of mocking, censoring, and shaming conservatives are over. We're not afraid anymore." Joy's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening, but for once she was silent. The sheer audacity of the declaration, delivered with such unflinching conviction, had momentarily stunned her into quiet. And just like that, the tone of the show had irrevocably changed. Joy Behar leaned forward, her red-framed glasses, usually an accessory, now resting at the tip of her nose like a battle flag, signaling war. Her smile, a thin, forced line, didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, how dramatic," she snapped, her voice thick with sarcasm, attempting to dismiss the moment. "A 20-some-year-old Trump loyalist walks in and tells a 30-year veteran of media that my time is up? How original." A few hesitant, uncertain claps followed from the audience, a stark contrast to the earlier, more robust laughter. But Karoline didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. "I don't care how long you've been sitting in that chair," she said coolly, her hands folded calmly on the table, a picture of composed defiance. "Decades of television don't excuse a decade of arrogance, and they definitely don't give you the right to shame Americans for not agreeing with your worldview." Joy chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "Oh, please, no one's being shamed. We're just tired of conspiracy theories, tired of anti-science, tired of pretending that shouting freedom justifies ignorance." Karoline's expression sharpened, her eyes piercing. "No, what you're tired of is being challenged." A pause. That one landed. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the unspoken truth. "You're tired of Americans pushing back when you tell them their values are bigotry, that their religion is dangerous, or that their patriotism is performative. You brand every opposing opinion as hate speech just to shut it down. That's not progress, Joy. That's authoritarianism with lipstick." Joy opened her mouth, a retort forming, but Karoline kept going, measured, unfazed, each word a precisely aimed dart. The narrative, once firmly in Joy's grasp, was now slipping irrevocably into Karoline Leavitt's hands. The transition to commercial break was abrupt, a jarring cut that momentarily silenced the studio but did nothing to dissipate the thick tension that now hung in the air. Backstage, it was so palpable you could almost taste it. Producers, usually masters of their domain, darted between crew members, their whispers urgent, hushed, delivered into headsets as if the very walls had ears. Dana, the show's executive producer, glanced nervously at the live feed, her brow furrowed. "She's not backing down," she muttered, the words a mix of disbelief and grudging admiration. On stage, the contrast was stark. Karoline Leavitt sat composed, a picture of serene confidence. She calmly dabbed her lips with a napkin, her posture as unyielding as her words had been. Joy Behar, by stark contrast, leaned heavily toward the table, her lips pursed into a tight, angry line, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm against the polished surface. A stagehand, ever diligent, approached Karoline with a makeup sponge, a silent offer to touch up any signs of the battle.
Karoline waved it off with a small, dismissive gesture. "No need," she said, her voice clear and steady, even off mic. "Let the sweat show. It's more honest." It was another subtle jab, another declaration that she was here not for performance, but for truth. The cameras rolled again, the brief respite of Anderson Cooper's pre-recorded segment having bought the team a mere 2 minutes. Now it was back to the real show, the live, unscripted confrontation. Whoopi tried to lighten the mood, her smile valiant but strained, a thin veil over the weight in the room. "Okay, folks," she said, her voice attempting a cheerful lilt. "We're back. It's been a lively morning." But before she could pivot, before anyone else could interject, Joy Behar jumped in, her voice now dripping with a renewed, almost aggressive condescension. "Let's not pretend you're a saint, Karoline," she began, the words of venomous caress. "You come from the same Trump machine that made cruelty a campaign strategy." Karoline Leavitt's expression didn't budge. Her posture remained firm, her silver cross necklace at her throat catching the light, a tiny, unwavering beacon. She calmly picked up her glass of water, took a small, deliberate sip, and set it down with slow, almost theatrical grace. "I'm not here to play your morality games, Joy," Karoline said, her voice steady, each word a stone placed carefully. "I'm here because the people you look down on, the factory workers, the small-town families, the veterans, deserve someone to speak for them, not someone who rolls their eyes on daytime television." The crowd responded with a ripple of cheers, a surprising wave of support that visibly unsettled the co-hosts. Sunny Hostin whispered something off mic, her eyes wide. Joy pressed on, unwilling to cede ground. "Oh, please don't lecture me on the forgotten American," she snapped, a dismissive wave of her hand. "You work in the White House now, remember? You're not exactly blue-collar anymore." Karoline nodded, a small knowing acknowledgement. "True, I've worked my way here. From New Hampshire to Washington, and every step I took was earned, not gifted through fame or a studio contract." A gasp, low and sharp, spread through the audience. It was a direct hit, a personal barb aimed squarely at Joy Behar's own trajectory. Even Whoopi Goldberg, usually unfazed, glanced up from her cue cards, her expression betraying a flicker of surprise. Joy leaned back, her lips tight, her earlier confidence visibly eroding. "You think you're so special because you can throw around tough words?" Karoline smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was sharp, precise. "No, Joy. I think I'm effective because I don't hide behind applause lines and rehearsed outrage. I came here knowing exactly who I'd face, and I'm not the one losing composure right now." The tension became electric, almost crackling in the air. Even the control room was silent, the cameras cutting between the two women like a prize fight in its final brutal rounds. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but paused, visibly recalibrating, searching for a comeback that wouldn't sound weak. Karoline, seeing her hesitation, simply folded her hands on the table, her gaze unwavering. "You've spent years talking down to conservatives on this show. But what you're really scared of, Joy, is that I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not here to be polite. I'm here to push back." The camera panned to the audience, some clapping, others looking stunned. The energy had shifted. Joy Behar, the daytime titan, had just been met with someone who wouldn't blink, and Karoline Leavitt was just getting started.
Karoline's final words, "I'm here to push back," hung in the air like smoke after a cannon blast. Joy Behar's smile cracked, just enough to reveal the raw tension beneath it. In the control room, producers whispered urgently into their headsets, debating whether to cut to another commercial, to stem the bleeding, but the audience was glued, riveted by the unfolding drama. "Push back," Joy repeated, forcing a brittle laugh, a desperate attempt to regain her footing. "You mean parrot talking points from a twice-impeached former president?" It was a familiar accusation, a safe harbor of condescension she often returned to. But Karoline leaned in, her voice dropping, lower but now utterly razor-sharp. "I don't parrot anyone. I think for myself, which is more than I can say for most of the legacy media." The crowd stirred again, a few bold claps ringing out, defying the usual studio decorum. Joy's eyes narrowed, her face tightening. "Don't get sanctimonious. You're a political operative trained to distract, deflect, and divide." Karoline fired back, her tone turning surgical, precise. "And you're a professional cynic. You've made a career out of mocking Americans who don't think like you. You say you're for women, but only the women who agree with you." That line landed hard, a direct hit to the heart of The View's self-proclaimed progressive mission. Even Sunny Hostin's usual smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. Joy tried to regain footing, to dismiss the blow. "You think this is about me, honey? I've been doing this since you were in braces. I've survived worse than you." Karoline raised a brow, a cool, almost amused expression on her face. "Maybe, but you haven't faced someone like me. Young, unapologetic, and not afraid to call out this smug moral superiority for what it is, arrogance in disguise." A collective, stunned "ooh" rippled through the audience. Joy scoffed, waving a dismissive hand toward the camera. "Well, congratulations, you've got your viral moment. That's what this is about, right?" Karoline sat back, her voice composed, unwavering. "This is about truth, and sometimes the truth doesn't come from the usual places or the usual faces." For a moment, the room was still, suspended in the aftermath of her words. Even Whoopi didn't interject. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it, a rare moment of speechlessness. The moderator's voice finally broke in from offstage, a welcome reprieve. "We'll be right back after this." The camera lights dimmed, the applause sign blinked uncertainly. A few audience members clapped, others just watched, riveted. Karoline leaned back in her seat, unfazed. Joy Behar looked straight ahead, jaw clenched. This wasn't just another guest segment, this was a reckoning. The cameras rolled again after the break. Joy Behar, clearly eager to pounce, adjusted her red-framed glasses. "Karoline, you said earlier you were here for truth, so here's one. Donald Trump lied repeatedly about everything, from the election to COVID to the economy, and you defend him." Karoline didn't flinch. "I defend the voters he empowered, the working class, the farmers, the parents, the Americans this show ridicules." Joy laughed sarcastically. "You mean the Americans you keep dividing with culture wars, drag shows, books, bathrooms? You think those are priorities?" Karoline's eyes narrowed, her voice colder than the studio air conditioning. "When parents are being labeled as domestic threats for speaking at school board meetings? Yes, Joy, that's a priority." That hit hard. Joy fired back. "Oh, come on, that's a distortion." "No," Karoline cut in, now leaning forward, her posture mirroring Joy's earlier aggression. "You distort. You mock. You roll your eyes every time a conservative mom speaks up. You act like they're uneducated, but they're smarter than you think, and they're done being silent." The audience murmured. This wasn't the usual light banter. This was a political firestorm aired live, and Karoline was feeding the flames with precision. Joy shook her head, trying to smirk. "And what? You're their savior now?" Karoline looked her dead in the eye. "No, I'm their microphone." The silence was deafening. The studio lights caught the glint of her cross necklace as she turned to the audience, scanning faces, watching reactions. Joy Behar glanced off camera for support, but none came. This wasn't going how she planned, and Karoline knew it. Karoline's last words echoed like a drumbeat. "I'm their microphone." The phrase didn't just sting, it stuck. Joy Behar shifted uncomfortably, her signature confidence visibly rattled. She wasn't used to guests like this, not ones who didn't flinch, not ones who turned her own format against her.
Karoline's last words, "I'm their microphone," echoed like a drumbeat, a resonant declaration that didn't just sting, it stuck. Joy Behar shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her signature confidence visibly rattled. She wasn't accustomed to guests like this, not ones who refused to flinch, not ones who so deftly turned her own format against her. Sunny Hostin, perhaps sensing the need to break the stifling silence, finally interjected. "You keep saying you speak for the silent majority, Karoline, but where do you draw the line? Are you okay with banning books? Silencing teachers?" Karoline turned to her, her composure unwavering. "No one's banning books. They're removing sexually explicit content from elementary school libraries. There's a difference. And if that offends you, maybe the problem isn't the parents." A scattering of claps, unusual for The View's typically uniform audience, punctuated her words. Whoopi narrowed her eyes. "So you're saying public schools should cater to one group's beliefs?" Karoline's tone was firm, unwavering. "I'm saying schools should focus on education, not ideological grooming. That's not one group's beliefs, Whoopi. That's basic parental rights." Joy scoffed again. You know what this sounds like? Fear-mongering. Karoline tilted her head, a slight challenging smile playing on her lips. Fear of what? That parents might want to say in their kids' education? That's not fear, that's democracy. The tension in the room crackled, so thick that a boom mic dipped too low from the ceiling, even the crew momentarily forgetting to stay steady. Joy tried to regain ground, launching into a familiar attack. You talk about democracy, but your side tried to overturn it on January 6th. Karoline straightened, her voice like a scalpel. And your side ignored violent riots across 2020. Burned cities, ruined businesses, ruined lives. Let's not play selective outrage, Joy. A small gasp rose from the audience. It wasn't often that someone dared to mention that on The View. Joy's eyes flared. You're deflecting. No, I'm reminding you that the truth doesn't only live on your side of the aisle. The air turned ice cold. Even Whoopi leaned back in her chair, observing. Karoline folded her hands on the table, her gaze sweeping across the panel. I came here expecting disagreement. I didn't expect the complete inability to acknowledge that the other half of this country exists, and they're watching. That last line landed with surgical force. The studio audience fell silent again. Joy Behar, for the first time in the segment, didn't have a comeback. The lights were still rolling, but The View had lost control of the narrative, and Karoline Leavitt had just seized it. The silence dragged for a moment longer, pregnant with discomfort. Then, Joy Behar shifted in her seat, forced a brittle chuckle, and turned toward the audience. Well, I guess we struck a nerve. Karoline didn't even blink. No, you struck the truth. Big difference. Whoopi attempted to diffuse the atmosphere. Let's move the conversation forward. Karoline, you're clearly passionate, but passion without compassion is just noise. Do you think your rhetoric sometimes goes too far? Karoline leaned back slightly, adjusting her blazer. I think your side has confused assertiveness with aggression. Just because I speak clearly doesn't mean I'm being cruel. Maybe you're just not used to conservatives who fight back. That hit differently. The crowd responded with a mixed wave of quiet claps and awkward shifting. Sunny Hostin jumped in, grasping at control. You've made your points, but this is still a daytime talk show. We try to have conversations here. Karoline's smile was polite, but sharp. Then why is it that when a conservative woman sits in this chair, it becomes a firing squad instead of a conversation? That question wasn't rhetorical, it was loaded. And suddenly, a new tension swept across the set. Not hostility, but something closer to reflection. Joy leaned in, trying one more jab. You're acting like a victim again, Karoline. No, I'm not a victim. I'm just not going to sit here and pretend that your double standard isn't obvious. If I were a liberal woman with these views, you'd be nodding along. The camera zoomed in just slightly, catching the firm lines around her eyes, the steel behind the poise. Joy sat back, arms crossed. She looked toward the producers, just off stage, but no rescue came. No teleprompter script could fix this. This wasn't the typical exchange. It was a chess match, and Karoline was playing the long game. Whoopi, to her credit, tried one more olive branch. Let's give her credit. She showed up. She didn't dodge questions, and clearly she's not afraid. Karoline glanced at her. Respect goes both ways. I knew I'd walk into a storm. I just didn't realize you'd all be so surprised when I brought lightning. A few in the audience let out a stunned ooh, while others just watched riveted. Joy Behar looked down, lips pursed tight. She knew what had just happened. Karoline hadn't just held her ground, she had taken it. The final segment was moments away, but no one was pretending anymore. Not the hosts, not the audience, not Karoline. The makeup artist didn't even step in during the break. No one wanted to break the tension with a puff of powder. When the cameras resumed, the usual upbeat music didn't quite land. It was background noise now. Something had shifted permanently. Anderson Cooper, brought in live via satellite for this final panel segment, appeared on the studio screen. He said, I've been watching backstage, and Karoline, whatever people think of your politics, you're undeniably commanding attention. Karoline nodded once, not smug, but focused. That's because the stakes are real, Anderson. This isn't just TV for me. I'm not here to sell a memoir or relive glory days. I'm here to challenge the narrative that's held this country hostage for a decade. Anderson raised an eyebrow. You're referring to what exactly? Karoline's voice was firm. The illusion that media elites and Hollywood personalities speak for all Americans. They don't. They speak for themselves, and people like Joy Behar amplify it. Joy raised her hand, chuckling bitterly. You think I'm the voice of Hollywood? I've been doing this for 25 years. I've earned my place. Karoline didn't miss a beat. You've earned your platform, sure, but you use it to sneer at anyone who doesn't share your worldview. You treat average Americans like punchlines. Now it wasn't just about politics, it was personal. Sunny tried to pivot. But you talk like you're the only one who cares about the country. Karoline turned to her, her eyes razor sharp. No, I talk like someone who knows how much it hurts to be ignored, mocked, and told to sit down because you're not part of the club. A woman in the front row nodded subtly but noticeably. Anderson leaned in again, curious. So what's your goal with moments like this? Karoline exhaled once, then her tone softened, not weak, but grounded. To show that you don't have to be famous to be fearless. That you can be young, unapologetic, and still speak for millions who feel voiceless. I'm not here for applause. I'm here because silence doesn't serve anyone anymore. There was no clapping this time, just a quiet wave of realization washing through the studio. Even Joy Behar stayed quiet. She wasn't defeated, but she was clearly disarmed. And Karoline knew it. The final question came from a producer off camera, whispered into Whoopi's earpiece. She hesitated, then leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the table. Karoline, let's put politics aside for a moment. If you could say one thing to young women watching, conservative or liberal, what would it be? The tension shifted again, but this time into something heavier, expectation. Eyes turned. Even Joy looked over with restrained curiosity, arms still crossed, but eyebrows raised. Karoline didn't blink. She turned slightly toward the main camera. Her tone dropped, more measured, more intimate. I'd tell them not to wait for permission. Silence. I don't care what party you belong to. If you believe in something deeply, don't let anyone at this table or any screen or any classroom talk you out of it. You're going to be called names. You're going to be told you're too much or too intense or too angry, but don't shrink to make others comfortable. She leaned in, and if someone tries to laugh you off or mock your values, don't get even. Get better, sharper, stronger. Outlast them. That landed. The audience didn't erupt in applause, but they listened and they respected it. Sunny Hostin surprisingly offered a slight nod. Whoopi looked thoughtful. Joy's lips parted like she might say something, but she didn't. Anderson, still watching from the monitor, cleared his throat. That's quite the message. Karoline's voice stayed low, steady. I've had to fight twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. That doesn't discourage me. It motivates me. Even Joy couldn't deny the moment. She gave a begrudging glance, then muttered, Well, at least you're not boring. Karoline smirked. You wouldn't have invited me if I were. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the credits began to roll. The music returned, but it no longer felt like filler. It was a cue. The conversation was ending, but the echo would linger. Karoline stood first. She didn't need a mic drop. She was the mic drop. Outside the studio, the air was thick with anticipation. Dozens of reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers waited behind barricades, phones raised, flashes firing. The moment Karoline Leavitt stepped through the glass doors, the crowd surged, not with chaos, but with energy. She didn't flinch. No security detail, no entourage, just a black blazer, sharp eyes, and a cross necklace catching the light. One reporter shouted, Karoline, were you surprised by Joy Behar's reaction? She kept walking. Another, did you expect to silence the entire panel? She paused at the steps, turned, faced the cameras. I didn't go there to silence anyone. I went there to make sure we were finally heard. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The use of we was deliberate, and it hit. Phones buzzed. Tweets were already live. Karoline Leavitt just walked out of the view like she owns the place. Say what you want, but she showed up and didn't flinch. Inside the building, producers huddled around monitors watching the social media metrics spike. Karoline Unfiltered was trending. Conservative influencers called it a masterclass in composure and conviction. Even neutral journalists admitted it. Karoline Leavitt hadn't just held her own, she had reset the tone of political discourse on mainstream television. Back at her car, she paused before getting in. A young woman in her 20s stood nearby, nervously holding her phone, half shaking. Miss Leavitt, I just wanted to say thank you. You said